they're not just coming here to aid humanity. They are coming into body on Earth to continue their evolution. So there is a degree of evolutionary work.
Are there moments in history where these types of souls, the IPs, come in more in waves or mass, depending on what humanity needs at that point?
I mean, a lot of the development of the Egyptian dynastic period, it wasn't fully developed just by IPs, but there were many interplanetary souls either in body in those dynasties, or what happened that many thousands of years ago is that a soul could step into body, what we might call materialize.
Before today's transmission, I wanted to take a minute to let you in on something that could change your life. If you've been doing the inner work and still feel like you're walking this path alone, you're not the only one. Most spiritual spaces give you endless content to consume, but not a tribe to grow with. That's why we created The Deep Dive, a living spiritual ecosystem designed to help you grow in community, rhythm, and real embodiment. Right now, our members are embarking on a journey exploring a core spiritual and practical teaching through daily activations, live community gatherings guided by me and our facilitators, and also participating in sacred challenges that are designed to help you live your practice and bring it to life. You'll be surrounded by seekers and leaders who've decided that they're done doing this work in isolation. If you're ready to find your people, visit the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen right now, and I'll see you inside. Dr. Linda Backman, welcome on Just Tap In. What are you most excited about right now globally and in your life?
Good question. Yeah, I would say I'm excited about continually discovering, meeting, coming into contact with people who, for all kinds of reasons, are being cracked open through all kinds of means to seek deeper understanding. What occurs to me just as I'm saying all that, so it must be dropping in for a reason. I'm involved with a wonderful group that is devoted to supporting parents, siblings, grandparents, where there has been a child that has passed, a child that has transitioned. And what I love about this group is that they focus on the continuity of the soul of the child. And they focus on aiding people who are grieving such a complicated human loss and understanding what I've had the great gift of learning over the last 30 years, that, the soul is the soul is the soul. And so for some reason that just popped into my mind. And I at times donate time and teaching with this group to really help people understand that even though sometimes we go through the human tragedy of human loss, that those loved ones are available and there are means of connecting with them. So why that's coming up, I have no idea. I just trust it, but that is what popped in. So I'm excited about that.
That's beautiful. And I also know that you're speaking from direct experience. After your second son, born prematurely, only lived very shortly, and you had to deal with that pain of the grief and the loss. And I'm really curious to understand how the insight of the soul going on and the work that you've been doing, which is essentially regression mixed with psychology, spiritual work, taking people into other lifetimes and the space between lives as well. How does that insight change the way we perceive or deal with grief or loss when it comes to us inevitably?
It's almost like, I mean, what occurs to me, Emilio, is an image in my mind of traditional, what I used to do years ago, traditional grief work is important, but is a little bit like when someone passes, when a loved one passes, it's like a door is closed and locked. And that's how it, in traditional circles, is perceived. But in spiritual circles, it's like a door closes, and then it's there's sort of a ability to look through that door, and the door is not solid. It's not like a solid wood door or solid steel door. It's a transparent door, and through that transparent door, we find that loved one that no longer has a physical body, but that's the only thing that's gone away. So I certainly did not know that. I mean, you've studied about my life's history, and the birth and passing of our second son was when I was 25 years old. And as you well know, given you and where you are in your life, I didn't understand any of these things back then. So yes, I got through it and I moved forward, but it was years later when I discovered, and now I have a clear sense of I was cleaning up karma. I have a sense of the soul of that child. It's not a tragedy. It's a stepping stone to advance that soul, advance my soul, and just gain a whole different perspective of course, what I've learned over 30 years of guiding regression, of what happens when we pass and what is the afterlife, and on and on. Yeah.
Mm. And you mentioned how fascinated you are with the advancement of souls. And I'm curious, you've done over 1,000 sessions, thousands of sessions at this point. What do you feel is happening to the souls that are on Earth right now in this current time, this inflection point for humanity? What is being collectively asked of us to move through in this advancement that we're in right now?
Well, you brought up earlier, Emilio, we were just chatting briefly about Egypt and touring the ancient dynastic sacred sites in Egypt where you've been and I've been. And there's a wisdom in the Egyptian dynasties, that being one of the three oldest civilizations on the planet. There's a wisdom of the intention of those earliest civilizations that still exists, but more of us need to grasp that. More of us need to. So this inflection point, because I agree with you. I do think humanity's at an inflection point. Humanity has come to different inflection points. But it's almost like we need the 100th monkey. We need that and I think it's growing. So I certainly am not, discouraged or think the needed evolution of humanity is not going to happen. But I think we're still working on grasping and almost like bringing the original intentions down to earth that were being transmitted through the portals and gateways that existed not just in Egypt, but existed in the development of the Egyptian civilization. So I think it's a great time of opportunity right now on the planet.
Mm. And you brought up the word karma when you were mentioning the story of your son. And, obviously coming from a Western trained background in psychology and, karma is a word that in the Western world has been thrown around with very different meanings. And I'd love to understand from your perspective of how you studied it. Are we collectively clearing karma as you might see it? And what really is that deeper meaning of clearing a karma or doing that work largely?
Yeah, that's also a great question. So as an individual soul, when we come into the body on Earth, one of the unique qualities of incarnating on Earth is that we have free will. So, we have certain things that are pre-planned before we step into the body and, the umbilical cord is cut and we're viable outside our mother's womb. We have life intentions. But because when we come to Earth, there's this unique concept that exists called free will. So we can go against those intentions. And so when we make human, conscious human decisions that are, not minor little things. I don't want listeners to think, it's always hard to put this into context and not make it overly left-brained, but decisions that are beyond a 5 on a 10-point scale of inappropriate behavior, if we can put it that way, incur karma. In other words, we're behaving in a way that's not the most useful. All of us have done that, myself included, of course, that we've all, that's what happens when we live in the human body. So individual karma is what actions did I take that were not beneficial? And then we come back into body, or we can balance karma within a lifetime. We can make a decision or decisions and still balance it even within a current lifetime or a subsequent lifetime. But along with that, I think there's group karma. There's families, communities, cities, countries, organizations, where we make group decisions that aren't the most useful. So karma pretty much is, where that Eastern term comes from. And, my sense is there's almost no one, if not there isn't anyone, who doesn't still carry some amount of karma. And we can talk more about this, but because I guide clients to tap into their soul level, even advanced souls that serve as guides from the higher realm haven't necessarily cleaned up every ounce of what we call karma. They're still working on that. That's a whole big topic of talking about who are those souls and how did they reach the point of serving as guides? And, we can certainly talk about that. So I talk with clients and I teach about karma and Dharma. So the flip side of karma is Dharma, meaning what have we accomplished? It could be in current life, but what have we accomplished in past lives? What are those skills, those capabilities, that orientation to life? Dharma means soul intention. So what soul intentions did we satisfy? And once we've done that, like being a capable romantic partner, being a capable child of our parents, or a capable parent of a child, once we've accomplished that, it continues to exist in our soul DNA. And that's our Dharma. Those are our skills.
Do those skills get transferred onto other lifetimes? Let's say in this lifetime you mastered a form of energy healing. Does that get transferred on to a next lifetime that you might incarnate into?
Yeah, I mean, it gets it's almost like, a cookie cutter with cookie dough, where you're making this impression of a heart or a Christmas tree, or whatever it might be. So the accomplishments we've gained, or Dharma, are energetically embedded in our soul energy at the soul level, at the higher self level. And once we've gained that, it's sort of like the child who goes to school and learns how to add first, and then after that learns how to multiply, but they don't lose the knowledge of how to add.
Yeah. And one of the things that you teach is, we're no longer at a stage of consciousness where we can treat everyone the absolute same, because part of the gifts of your work that has come through in these regressions is that there are different types of souls that are here right now. Before we reveal all of the different ones that they are, I'd love to start with the first one of, in your personal story, what was the moment you discovered that you were an earth-based soul?
Boy, let me see if I can answer that going back. Well, I'll just say maybe this is a way of getting into that and helping me remember that. When I trained in the longer regression work that I guide, the past life and soul level regression work, when I trained in that work, my original mentor primarily taught about, based on his own regressions that he had guided over a course of many years, he taught primarily those of us that were training with him, he taught about earth-based souls. He knew a certain amount about one or both of the other two types of souls that I know we'll get into in our conversation. But so as I was studying with my original mentor, and then started guiding regressions myself, based on what I learned that would come forward in accessing our higher self, that paralleled what I was learning about myself. So I'll give an example just so people are probably wondering, so what is Linda talking about? Not to make this too long of an explanation, but if we're an earth-based soul, when our soul is created, we join with a small group of other souls that I like to call a soul pod. And all those souls, it's about 10 to 20 souls. All those souls were created at approximately the same point in time. You could also call it soul homeroom for people that went to school and had homerooms. So it's that community, so to speak, of souls. So I'll just say that, thinking about my own soul pod, that I met as a very young soul. So I knew pretty quickly that I had a soul pod, and I began to learn about, I was learning about regression, but I was also a regression client. And just maybe one just interesting piece that I'll just share. I was a regression client. That's the way you learn, is to trade regressions. And my husband also was a regression client. And we discovered in our separate regressions, my husband and me, that we happen to be in the same soul pod. That's not terribly common for people in romantic relationship. But my husband and I discovered that get this straight, my father's father and his mother's father are in our soul group, even though, of course, my husband and I aren't related by blood. Mm-hmm. So that's just an example of those things started surfacing. And it's like, okay, that's how I began to understand I was an earth-based soul.
Beautiful. And you also say that 95% of people on the planet right now are earth-based in mid-range soul development, around like on a scale of 1 to 10, around like a 4 or a 5. 5% of those, half of the 5%, so 2.5, are advanced earth-based souls, which is the one that you identify with. So let's first start off with that difference between someone that is an advanced earth-based and also the 95% of the people that are on the planet right now. And that's probably changing. We'll get into that.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we talk about that, I think what's really important is for me to say, and for everybody to hear it loud and clear, even if we're now a rather advanced soul, we were all kindergartners and first graders and second graders as souls, as of course, as was I. So yes, what I've learned through regression clients is, as you just said, about 95% of humans are mid-range of development in terms of evolution and are earth-based souls, which is partly explains some of the issues that go on our planet and partly explains the inflection point. So then that other 5%, which is, when people think about it, that's not very many humans, although, there's a lot of people on the planet. So that other 5%, about half of that 5% are experienced earth-based souls. And I'll just touch on one. This is always hard to keep these topics clean and not confusing. Experienced earth-based souls may have more than one current incarnation. So
simultaneously,
not necessarily like it. Okay, I'll use myself as an example. If I have, if there's another person on the planet that is the same soul that I am, that doesn't mean we were born on the same day. That doesn't mean we're going to transition from the body on the same day. But it does happen that some experienced earth-based souls sort of like, kind of have two people affecting humanity.
If you were to meet that other aspect of the soul, would you recognize them?
Well, those of us who understand and accept this as possible, including myself, would be the answer. And because oftentimes that's called a split incarnation. So oftentimes two people that are a split incarnation, they will have a similar body structure. They'll have a similar, so you might say, facial countenance. And there will likely be something similar about their biology, about what they do in life or experiences they've had in life.
What happens? This is an interesting question. If they find each other cute, what happens? Like if they decide to date for a little bit, is that what happens there?
Well, that's a great question as well. I do know in rare circumstances that split incarnations end up in romantic relationship. It's rare, but it does happen.
Wow. That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just share this quickly. I once worked with a couple, and that was their case. They are a split incarnation, and it's a heterosexual couple, so it's a man and a woman. And when I was working with the woman one day, she said, Linda, when I have an argument with my partner, I also know in a funny sort of way, I'm arguing with myself.
Literally. Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, interesting.
What was the moment that brought you to maybe a client's story that made you realize this was possible, that the split incarnations were possible?
Basically through regression, there are times when I will guide, in separate regressions to members of a romantic couple or to good friends, people that know each other. And so in some cases, I'll guide a regression for each person. And that's where the information surfaces. I get hunches as I interview the people, and my guides are working with me and downloading information to me. But most of the time it comes through in regression. And then there are times, just to add this in, I'm a believer there are people on the planet that are very capable channels. They're very capably intuitive. And on occasion, there's a couple of people that I won't name any names, but they are capable channels. And because I know them well, I have the opportunity to go check out what came forward in a regression and ask if it's valid. So I like, you might say, cross-validating on rare occasion. And if I do that, then I will share with the client that I'm going to do that and that I will give them feedback in terms of what I receive. Yeah.
I love that you're seeking out that evidence. And you mentioned how in your work, your guides work with you, your spirit guides, higher self, to download information. I'm beginning to start getting an awareness that that's happening to me when I'm doing interviews or this podcast. When did that moment come online for you of knowing that you weren't doing this work, just you, Linda, alone, interviewing these people in regression?
Yeah. I mean, again, hard to remember back. When I first fell into this kind of work, I was definitely a skeptic. And I was extremely nervous about, shall I believe that you can guide people to access past lives? Am I going to believe that you can guide people to, connect with guides and their own higher self? And because I'm a conventionally trained psychologist, and I used to work in that mode, it took me a while to begin to trust. So, but in the sort of early days of guiding regression, there have been different people sort of along my journey who are capable channels. And so I started seeking my own, gaining support for myself. So I think the answer, when did I begin to realize I was being, and I'm pretty claircognitive. So a lot of information comes to me just through a sense of knowing, probably at least the last 15, maybe 20 years. I teach people about this, is that some of us are primarily clairvoyant. Some of us are primarily what we call clairsentient, meaning emotions are our intuitive avenue. But for me, it's more claircognitive. I've begun to trust that something just kind of drops in, like the comment about the grief support. And for families who've had a child pass, just slowly but surely. It was gradual, for sure.
That's so beautiful you mentioned that, because a lot of us believe that to be psychic, we have to be seeing things, hearing things, feeling spirits, whatever it is. But the claircognizant piece that you mentioned is something that is probably the most undervalued or maybe overseen, because it's so subtle. Like I'm starting to believe that is the psychic ability through which I receive my messages, where it's just an immediate knowing. I'm having a conversation, something will drop in. And it's like, maybe I had learned that somewhere, but sometimes it's really hard to track where that information is coming from. And where would you say it comes from?
Oh, I mean, I have no doubt that depending on who we are, and we can talk about this as we talk about the other two types of souls as well. It comes from either our higher self, either our soul energy and spirit, or it comes from our spiritual guides that are not our higher self. So it comes from a level of guidance, either from our own soul or from a guide.
Mm.
Yeah.
You've said that one of your main guides is what we could consider an ascended master. How did that come to be, that connection point, when you started to realize that was the case?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. Okay, well, the story, to try to make it semi-short, and some people have heard me talk about this. When I first fell into this type of work, it was through the passing of a colleague, and I was in my middle 40s. I didn't believe in soul or reincarnation. I just didn't really know much about that. And I had a colleague who passed in the early 90s, and he started talking to me from the other side and showing me past lives. So at first I thought, this is just crazy. But then it was ongoing. So, and I was already married to my husband. We'd probably been married for 20 or 25 years. But we'd never talked about soul or reincarnation, which even to this day seems kind of strange given who we both are today. But anyway, I began to explain to my husband what I was experiencing. He knew my colleague. They were friends that played golf together at times. And so I began to explain to my husband what I was experiencing. I really thought my husband would just go, as a spouse might say to a spouse, "Oh, honey, that's just the craziest thing I've ever heard. Would you just forget about it and not talk to me about that anymore?" But that is not what happened. And my husband looked at me that day and he said calmly, "Well, okay, that's what you're experiencing." And I said to him, "Why are you so calm?" And then my husband, whose first name is Earl. So then Earl began to say to me, "Oh," and he was in his middle 40s as well at the time. And Earl said, "I realize now," and you, Emilio, have probably heard me talk about this, but Earl said to me on that day in 1993, he said, "Oh, I think I repressed something that happened to me as a boy." And I said, "What do you mean?" And Earl said, "Yeah, only now do I remember that when I was a child about age 10, Earl said, I began to remember my past lives in detail." And he said, "I knew they were my lives. Don't ask me how I knew, but I did." And Earl said, "But I blocked it all out because there was no one in my life back in the middle 50s that would have believed me," or so he thought. So that relates to guides. That's why I'm telling that story. So as time went by, Earl started saying, "I've always had a guide." And I said, "Okay, well, tell me more about that." And Earl said, "Yeah, there's this guide. And I've kind of always had a sense of him." It's like, oh, that's, a surprise to me. And Earl said, "Yeah." And I said, "Does he have a name?" And Earl said, "Yeah. He tells me to call him teacher." Okay. Well, years began to go by. I started guiding regression. Earl does not guide regression. Although he's actually sat in my trainings many times, he could guide it if he wanted to. But, and then there was a certain point where, and my husband is extremely intuitive, more intuitive than I am. And then at a certain point, Earl said, "Yeah, I'm getting a name for my guide." And he said, it's the same guide, but now he wants to really tell me who he is. And so, long story short, the guide that that had been speaking to Earl for years, said, many people call me Maitreya or Lord Maitreya. If you go to Egypt, you can find there are temples to Maitreya. There's also many pieces to these stories. Lord Maitreya, who is the most long-standing, advanced, earth-based soul in the spiritual realm, who no longer incarnates. And so then Earl was receiving more and more downloads from Lord Maitreya. At a certain point, probably 12 to 15 years ago, it's just hard to remember, I knew I had a guide, but there was a shift in who was my primary guide. And the shift happened because as my husband Earl and I began to work more together, Lord Maitreya explained that the higher realm had decided that Earl and I should have the same primary guide. And so my primary guide is also Lord Maitreya. And I'll add in one more quick piece just because listeners might find it interesting. On our recent trip to Egypt this year in 2025, on the final day in and around Cairo, and we weren't at Giza per se, where the pyramids are. We're at a different location where the oldest pyramid is, dedicated to the pharaoh whose name was Djoser. We were at the Djoser pyramid, and Earl began to hear Lord Maitreya speaking to him, and Lord Maitreya explained that his final incarnation was as one of the senior advisors to that pharaoh, and we were in the location of the last incarnation of Lord Maitreya in Egypt.
Wow.
It was quite fascinating. Yeah.
What a story. What a story. Oh my
Yeah.
God. I didn't know that. I mean, I'd done a lot of research, but I didn't come across that one. So thank you for sharing it on here. And also in your work, you're taking clients, into this space in between lives. And there came a point where you would ask the clients to go to the home location. And when you took them to the home location, sometimes they would be going places off planet, off Earth. And then that brings us to the second type of soul, if you want to share what you discovered there.
Yeah, I mean, what happened, Emilio, is I probably started guiding the longer regression somewhere around 1999 or 2000, in that range of time. And initially, and I started guiding multiple clients each week. Initially, as best I remember, most of my clients were earth-based souls. And they were fitting the paradigm that I'd learned from my training and then co-teaching with my mentor. But then, and now it probably is somewhere in the range of 18 to 20 years ago, something like that, I started paying attention to what my clients were learning week by week. And what I was learning, because I learn from every single client, that's one of the beauties of guiding regression, I started realizing about maybe 18 to 20 years ago that about half of my clients, maybe 60% of my clients, were learning that they are not earth-based souls. They were learning, and this term came through regression, so I use the term interplanetary. As you know, the term interplanetary can be exchanged for ET, starseed, that term all means the same. So some of my clients, and to this day, probably at least 50% of my clients are interplanetary souls. So what that means is an interplanetary soul's home base is not the Earth's spiritual frequency. An interplanetary soul's home location, if they're incarnate, which of course is how I learn from my clients, If I'm working with what I call an IP soul, interplanetary, often in the regression, the client learns where is their home location in the celestial realm? Where does their higher self reside in the celestial realm? And often it's a planet, a star system. It might be a space without density. It could be a spacecraft. And there are some interplanetary souls that aren't located in only one location in the celestial realm. They come from more than one location. So I've learned a lot over the years from IP Soul clients. The primary reason that interplanetary souls come to Earth is because they come from advanced cultures in the greater celestial realm, and they come to Earth to help aid humanity to grow and evolve.
Mm. Without even needing to go into regression, are you able to pick up or sense a soul's frequency that might be what you consider an IP interplanetary? And what gives you maybe that hunch that's the person that you're talking to?
Yeah, it's a great question too. The answer is yes, because I've worked with so many interplanetary souls. So I always do a moderately lengthy interview before I guide a regression, because I want to get to know my client, because what comes forward in the regression, I feel like it's a part of my responsibility as the regression therapist to help the client sort of integrate what are they learning from the regression. How does that fit with their current persona? What are the indications, just because they are the human that they are, that they're interplanetary? So some of those signs, some of the indications when I'm just meeting the client, and, as listeners listen to me talk about this, what I want listeners to hear loud and clear, it doesn't mean an IP soul is going to tick all these boxes. So these are just possibilities. An interplanetary soul oftentimes is very sensitive energetically. So their intuition may be quite advanced. Sometimes as younger people, they struggle with, what is the matter with me? And I don't feel like I fit in. And I'm not that typical teenager that behaves like my peers. And why are there certain situations where I'm uncomfortable? Too many people, my friends all want to go to concerts, but I don't do well with all the loud noise at the concerts, or, whatever. So that's one possibility. Interplanetary souls are usually advanced in one way or another. They might be highly skilled artistically. They might be very technologically advanced. They're an IP soul, because they come to Earth, because they're evolved, will have some even just personality characteristic that's very advanced. They're very caring, they're very supportive. And then there's the flip side. And the flip side is that interplanetary souls often struggle with things like allergies, digestive disorders, autoimmune issues. And again, everybody not ticking all these boxes, but just possibilities.
There's a checklist. We're going through the checklist right now.
Yes. I don't want people to think, well, I'm not IP if I can't, tick all those boxes. Being diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. Sometimes the autistic spectrum, they may fit that category simply because they haven't been in body on Earth many times. And so they're just not as experienced as an Earth-based soul in living in body on Earth with human life. Yeah, but they're usually very fascinating people. but sometimes they don't fit into everyday culture easily.
Mm. Are there moments in history where these types of souls, the IPs, come in more in waves or mass, depending on what humanity needs at that point?
That's another beautiful question. The answer is absolutely yes. I mean, a lot of the development of the Egyptian dynastic period wasn't fully developed just by IPs, but there were many interplanetary souls either in body in those dynasties, or what happened that many thousands of years ago is that a soul could step into body, what we might call materialize. A soul could materialize in an adult body and then dematerialize. That no longer happens. That does not occur.
Huh.
Yeah.
Will we come to a moment in time when maybe these interplanetary souls don't have to go through the whole human experience and maybe just appear in their original, home location bodies per se? Let's say alien bodies.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of pieces there that probably important to talk about. That's a great question. I know when I guide regression, and, I would love, well, people can read about this in some of my books, but if someone just kind of shadowed me as I guide regression, what they would hear at times from the client, and people probably understand, regression means the client gives me the information. I don't give them the information. So yes, I mean, sometimes I'm guiding a client. I'm guiding, the first step is a past life regression. So I'm guiding the client into a past life scene. And then I start asking questions like, what kind of scene, where are they? But then I begin to ask about the physical structure and the clothing of the person they are in the past life. And, I mean, I don't want to say I've heard it all because I'm sure I haven't heard it all, but, I always start with the feet. And I have certainly had clients who will say, I have 3 toes. My feet are much bigger than average. My feet are furry or hairy, unlike a human. And then as they move up the body and describe the body, starting with the feet and coming to the head, I'm hearing, arms longer than average. I'm hearing unique shape of head. Yes. So, I mean, that's a great question of, will IPs appear at some point in time in their, you might say, native image, their actual image, the being that they are at their home location. As you ask at Emilio, I'm sort of asking my guides in my head. And, my guides are saying maybe, but right now humans aren't ready for that. I mean, you and I might be, given who we are, but most humans are not ready for that to happen. Yeah.
I was coming to the same conclusion as well as you were explaining. Like, so much would need to change in human consciousness, especially with, as you said, many souls are still in that mid-range development where we're still in that separative state of consciousness where we see even our own different expressions of the human race as completely alien to us. So imagine an actual alien coming in, how we would treat them. But I feel like, we would need to do a little bit more evolution on a consciousness level to fully accept another being that looks nothing like us, maybe doesn't even look humanoid.
Mhm. Yes, and I'll just add in that your question about what leads me to begin to suspect when I'm meeting a client that they might be IP, and I never tell the client what I suspect because I don't want to bias the regression. But and I'm sure this will probably resonate with listeners, there are people that, though we may, zip it up and say nothing, there are people that we look at and we say internally, that person just looks just somewhat different than a lot of humans. They have unusually shaped ears. They have an unusual shape to their head. And sometimes that relates to them being interplanetary.
Mm.
Yeah.
Is Elon Musk an IP?
That's interesting you asked that, and people have asked me that before. I've certainly not regressed Elon Musk, but if I had to give you my hunch, the answer would be yes.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
What other reasons could an IP come down here for, rather than, you mentioned assisting humanity, but then we bring in the element of free will, right? Can that free will go off onto the other end of the spectrum where maybe they're not fulfilling that intention of assisting humanity? I guess my question would be, like, are there other intentions when it comes to these soul types?
Well, I think part of the answer, I think this is what you're asking. Part of the answer is, if an IP, or when an IP incarnates on Earth, they're not just coming here to aid humanity. They are coming into body on Earth to continue their evolution. So there is a degree of evolutionary work. And, some of my experiences are just, to me, utterly fascinating. I have worked with some IP soul clients who, in current life, have a relationship struggle with someone in their life. Doesn't matter who it is, could be friend, could be family member. And the soul of that, the dyad, that problematic dyad of the client and someone else. I have worked with IP soul clients where the baggage, you might say, that my client is trying to resolve with someone else is because they had a past life with that soul not on Earth, and that there's karma from one or more past lives that did not happen on Earth. And when that information is revealed in the regression, it often is a key in a lock for the client of, because at times in the regression, I never know what will come forward in a regression. It's spontaneous, but sometimes the regression will go to the past life where there was a problematic relationship with that soul, and that soul is in body on Earth currently. So that just, sets up an understanding for the client that they never had before. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to mention about interplanetary souls before we move on to the last and third type of soul?
I mean, I guess all I'd say, again, because one of my books is all about and only about interplanetary souls. Many interplanetary souls struggle to be here. And so, not all, so I don't want to say that, but I would say to listeners, if either you think you're an interplanetary soul, or someone, or you're in a relationship of some type with an interplanetary soul, trust you're here with purpose. Trust you didn't come to Earth for no reason. Yeah. Beautiful.
I guess that segues us into the angelic soul type. When did you first discover that this was also a possibility? And what would you like to say about them?
Yeah. A little bit. So I discovered angelic soul clients a little bit later than I discovered interplanetary soul clients. I've asked my guides about that, and a lot of this has been led by my guides for me to help support these people and to learn more about these unique types of souls that come to Earth, because we need the wisdom of these souls on Earth. I probably began recognizing clients that were angelic realm souls 12 to 15 years ago. Yeah. So to try to kind of characterize, and well, let me first explain, where do they come from? So what I call an angelic realm soul is a soul that comes from the angelic realm. The angelic realm is a group of souls that directly serve source. And, people can exchange that term. There's all kinds of words for source: God, Great Spirit, the divine. A term I use a lot is an Eastern term called the Manu. But that all means source. So the cadre of angelic souls are like the emissaries, the ambassadors of source energy. And if we try to put human language to it, which is a little bit difficult, the words I usually use are love, compassion, non-judgment, equality. That's the energy that an angelic realm soul, sort of like the backbone energy of that angelic realm soul. What I call AR souls. Some agree to come to Earth. It's always a choice. Some agree to come to Earth because I'm sure listeners know this as well, if not more than I do, because our planet needs more love, compassion, non-judgment, equality, not pigeonholing people. And so I have worked with a number of clients over the years, and I've written about this in especially my newest book. There's a lot of client material in that book from Angelic Realm Souls. Angelic Realm Souls, sometimes you might think, if you meet one of them, that they're naive or Pollyanna, and yet that is their nature. Their nature, they're some of the most caring, non-judgmental people that you can imagine. They don't seem to get easily upset by people's behavior, but they've come into body to balance that lack in humanity. Some AR souls that I work with are still actively involved in a Western religion, as opposed to some of my clients that are very spiritual. They've stepped away from Western religion. But some of these angelic realm souls still, to a degree, are involved in Western religion because they're tied to source. And so that's their personal means, or their personal sort of paradigm of needing that, what they feel is direct contact with the divine. So I've guided a lot of angelic realm souls. The angelic realm is coordinated, is led by the archangels. And some of the archangels do incarnate. So I have worked with clients that are aspects. An aspect just means a portion, a slice of the soul of an archangel. The two archangels that I've worked with that are clients are Archangel Michael and Archangel Gabriel. And I have no doubt they come to Earth. And that might shock people. And sometimes these embodied archangels are just your neighbor next door, the the cashier at the grocery store, the first grade teacher that teaches your child. And then sometimes they are teachers, authors, people that have some public persona. But I have no doubt that about 1 to 2% of the human population are angelic souls. They are, again, they're almost always glass half full versus glass half empty. And they're cool people. I mean, I have some people that are close personal friends that are angelic realm souls. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, you were mentioning how, with the state of affairs of where we are right now, the planet needs more of these energies: love, non-judgment, compassion. I guess my question would be like, why are we not having more and more and more of these types of souls come in? Or are we, based on where the planet is right now?
Yeah, that's a perfect question, and an important one, I think, to ask. What I've been told of late meaning the last probably 6 months to 18 months, is that the higher realm source, the Manu, coordinating guides, are intent on having more interplanetary souls and more angelic realm souls incarnate on Earth, because they're hoping, and it's all there is no perfection in the higher realm. They don't know exactly what will solve things, but that there is a push, if you will, toward preparing these souls to come to Earth. And that's an important piece, that if an interplanetary or an angelic realm soul has either never been here or been here 2 or 3 times or 5 times, there's the need for more preparation, because even as an Earth-based soul, it's not always easy to be here. So there's a lot of intense preparation that happens before these souls come into body on Earth.
What does that preparation look like? Is it something that is being prepared on Earth, or before they come, there's a preparation process that is going on?
Yes, before they come into body, there are advanced souls, and some that are still incarnating, some that are not. There are advanced souls in the higher realm. It's almost like educating them about what it's going to be like to operate in a human community, but also to operate within these bodies that, you and I live within. And that's the reason that IP souls and also angelic realm souls sometimes struggle with physiological issues. It's because they're just not used to working with this human body as their vehicle.
Mm-hmm. So it's almost like they're receiving a type of training on how to be a human, Lesson 1, how to pay taxes. Lesson 2, how to go to the bathroom. Or what is that training process like?
What are the ins and outs of what it's like to deal with being in the human body? People that are rude. If you're an angelic realm soul, your whole orientation is love and compassion. Well, anybody listening knows that that's not true of all humans, or that's not true 24/7 of all humans. So how do they deal with that? How do they withstand that? That's not always easy to do. So I do know the higher realm is constantly, I'll use the term brainstorming. How can we get humans to operate in a more inclusive, egalitarian, kind to each other manner? Because humanity doesn't have that figured out. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we see it, you know, and I know. We see it everywhere in current events with Russia invading Ukraine and, you know, all the ins and outs, the starvation in Gaza, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
When an archangel chooses to incarnate, are they choosing lifetimes where they get to be like behind the scenes and influencing in that way? Or do they choose positions of leadership where they can make a bigger impact?
Absolutely both. Absolutely both. Some are people out in the, you know, in sort of not literally on a stage necessarily, but with a platform. And then sometimes they're your neighbor next door. And they're there to help if somebody in the neighborhood has an illness and there's a meal that needs to be delivered. I mean, they play both roles. And, you know, for listeners, just pay attention to the people in your life, and or even just pay attention to public figures. You know, I have the great fortune of having a few close friends who have huge public platforms, entertainers and musicians and that kind of thing. And you can just tell the difference. There are people that want to mentor somebody else. It's not all about, you know, maybe they've been in their field and they're quite, you know, they're a nameable quantity after 20 or 30 years of working at whatever their craft is. But their interest is mentoring younger people in that field. I mean, you know, if people use their smellers, so to speak, you have a sense of more experienced souls. And then remember, we all climb the ladder of evolution. Yeah.
So even the last two types of souls, the interplanetary and angelic, they're also evolving by just being here, not just the earth-based.
Yes. And, you know, I mean, different pieces, Emilio, keep popping in because there's so much to say about this. When an IP or an AR comes to Earth, yes, they are still working on their own soul's evolution. They're also, we might say, researchers. They're learning about how to manage in body on Earth, in the human body. And then they're taking that information back to their home location and educating other IPs or ARs so that they can come to Earth as well. So sometimes they're a little bit like a scout.
A scout, like warning them, guys, that was a ride. That was a ride. I don't know if I recommend it.
And I'm sure at times that is the communication. Yeah. Yeah.
Back to the angelic souls for a second. I'm curious to know when you're regressing an angelic soul, how do they describe home for them?
You know, it varies. You know, if we just said, okay, you or I, Emilio, we've had the great fortune. We have visited every country on this planet. And, you know, then we would start to talk about, so what's unique about, you know, the South African culture? You know, what's unique about, you know, people that live in Latvia? You know, what's unique? So IPs, not angelic realm souls, because they all come from the angelic realm, but IPs come from so many, basically innumerable locations. Each location is unique. So one location, they might communicate through color. One location might have what we think of as a family. They, you know, two people commit to each other in a romantic relationship and then they have children. Another location may have none of that, that all the souls are completely solitary. Some of them survive by some kind of nourishment. Others, there is no, actually, I'll give you a quick example in a minute that pops in my mind, but the others, they don't eat. They don't, those might be an IP that comes into body on Earth and forgets to eat. Here's a quick
But then
example.
they love hamburgers while they're here.
Right, exactly. Or they, that's all they eat or what, whatever. Quick example of a client is a woman I guided in regression more than once. She is a highly skilled medical doctor. She's a researcher in a respected, obviously I'm leaving out identifiable details. She works in a very respected medical research center in the United States. And it took her quite a while to figure out why she was so, she might say, unusual. She comes from a location in the spiritual realm where the souls remain as children permanently. So think about, the healthy child, the characteristics of children. They're fun-loving. They want to play when they want to play. They laugh a lot. They, if they could eat ice cream all day long, if their parents let them, they'd eat ice cream all day long, or, hamburgers all day long, or whatever. And so this woman, who's very, very smart, very capable, once I started working with her and she was willing to be honest with me, she said, I have times when I come home from work, she said, I have a whole room of stuffed animals. And, I don't remember how old she is, 40s or 50s, 40s, I think. And she said, I just want to go hang out with my stuffed animals. And I spend an hour or two talking to and loving on my stuffed animals. If people saw me, they'd say, and you're that capable medical researcher? Because we discovered that she comes from a permanent child-oriented culture as an IP.
Super interesting. Yeah. And I know one of the books that really inspired you is by Barbara Marciniak, and she is connected deeply with the Pleiadians. Mm-hmm. I'm curious if you've come across those souls, IP souls, that are from these locations that we're more familiar with in the spiritual community, like the Pleiades, Arcturus, Lyra, like those types of like well-known, not well-known, but in the common lexicon in the spiritual community that we know of.
Yes, I have. I think about one that sticks in my mind, and you've mentioned it, is 2 or 3 clients from Arcturus. And there was, I'm a bit of a researcher, so, I do my best to remember, what did I learn about that client who said they were from Arcturus? And there were some overlapping characteristics of the souls that come from, some of these nameable locations. But, the flip side is so many of the locations, the home bases, if you will, where IPs come from, the name of that location is meaningless to us as humans. But yes, I have worked with, Pleiadians and Orion's Belt and those kinds of locations. Yeah.
Are those souls here transmitting any specific message or playing a certain role? For example, if we're looking at Pleiades, what would be an IP soul from the Pleiades intention for coming to Earth?
Yeah, that's interesting. Some of that, my brain doesn't hold on to those specific details of, if there are 3 different clients who are from the Pleiades, what's their specific orientation? My mind doesn't really contain a lot of those. Sometimes it's kind of funny. It's like when I finish a regression, within an hour or 2, I can still remember the details. And I record regressions and take very detailed notes. But within an hour or 2, most of the time, I don't remember a lot of the specific details. I think part of that is because it's the client's regression and not mine. But I think the other explanation for that is because I'm somewhat out of body. I'm somewhat in trance when I'm guiding a regression, because I need to be, in order to be receiving my own, direction and download to work with the client.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Same experience with the podcast. I can rarely remember specific details. I have to go back and rewatch it after it goes live on the platforms.
Yeah. Yeah. And most of me thinks that's a good thing, that you or I or anybody else that does things that, types of things you do or types of things I do, that we need to allow ourselves to be permeable to the point where, questions you need to ask in a podcast are dropping in, and questions I need to ask in a regression are just kind of dropping in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's the intuitive heart-based side. And now that we covered the 3 soul types, there's an overarching, and you mentioned it briefly, the Manu, or the source, or essentially maybe the guides of the universe per se. What have you discovered about that force that brings intelligent life together and creates universes?
Yeah, I mean, that to a degree I can answer. So I always put it this way, I say it's my understanding. This is what I've gained so far. What we call source, or what I tend to call the Manu, again, same thing. And I'll define that in a minute. But it's my understanding that the higher level of coordination, called source, that guides Earth, is a highly evolved group of souls that is charged with guiding Earth. What I've been told, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second, but what I've been told more than once, and that's where I look for overlapping information. Like, I don't hear it just from a client, I hear it from more than one client, that source that guides Earth, source does not guide, we might say, the universe. There are other advanced beings, advanced energies that serve to guide, we might say, other parts of the celestial realm. And occasionally my guide will joke with me. I mean, I could ask questions from now until forever. So I'm often asking questions to my guide. And on occasion, I'll ask a question. My guide will sort of briefly chuckle and will say, Linda, that's really above your pay grade. Okay. So, it's a little bit like, okay.
Classified files.
Classified, or honestly, I think part of it is that I am focused and my guide is focused on humanity's evolution. And I'm not focused on the evolution of another planet or another star system. And I think that's part of the reason I don't receive information. But so what I understand, and I've heard this far more than once, so I think it's valid. What we call God, Source, the Manu, is a group soul, is made up of four. When Earth was ready for soul embodiment, at a higher frequency that probably is above my pay grade, a higher frequency brought together four highly advanced interplanetary souls. All the souls that originally came to Earth were interplanetary because they had to come from somewhere else. They weren't, you might say, indigenous. And I don't mean indigenous as in native peoples, but they weren't indigenous to Earth. So four highly evolved interplanetary souls were brought together to become Source. And they do what they can with their wisdom to guide Earth, but they don't come down here and decide elections or end wars or, solve human issues. They only work through guides that guide us as humans to solve issues. But that's what I know about what is Source.
That's so interesting. And as a researcher, I'm curious to know if you've found or maybe cross-referenced this story of the four souls in other maybe ancient texts, religious texts. Is there anything that has been written down that confirms sort of or cross-references this story?
The only thing, Emilio, I can say about that is that, of course, we have a zillion creation stories on this planet. And we have westernized creation stories and we have easternized creation stories. And the three oldest civilizations on the planet are Egypt, what used to be called Mesopotamia, where Iraq and Iran come together, where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers come together, once called Mesopotamia, and an early culture that existed in today, what is southern Pakistan. It's called the Indus River civilization. There's a river in southern Pakistan called the Indus River, and there was the third earliest civilization existed there. You can study the creation stories of all three earliest civilizations. And probably most spiritually oriented people know those civilizations didn't have one deity. They had a pantheon of deities. And so that's the one overlapping piece I would say. There's maybe one more quick thing I can say about that. But even though, of course, in the Western culture, we have three religions based on Abraham that basically honor what we might call one God. That's not what the East believes. And so how can one be right and one be wrong? That makes no sense. The other thing I do know from regression and a certain amount of channeling is that in all three of these earliest cultures, some of the same souls were incarnate simultaneously in the development of these earliest cultures. And some of the souls that we could put names to, like some of the Archangels, some of the original nameable souls that we sort of maybe overly venerate or overly elevate in our culture, but some of the same original souls that were once interplanetary that came to Earth and stayed and technically became Earth-based souls existed in all three of the earliest civilizations.
Mm.
Yeah.
Definitely something advanced must have had to pop in to, if we look at as you mentioned, the earliest civilizations, there was rapid spikes of development and innovation that if you look at it from a perspective of, they did it so quick. And actually, even now where we are, 100 years ago, this was a very different world. And that's just a blink of human existence.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating.
Totally fascinating. Yeah.
And Dr. Linda, as we come to an end of the conversation, I just wanted to bring through a few questions that would really tie in the knot of this beautiful transmission. A lot of this has been about remembering who we are. And I'm curious to know, what do you feel is the cost of living our lifetime not remembering who we truly are?
Very interesting question. I think I'll answer that in a couple of ways. I think some people follow their soul agreements, serve humanity without consciously having a lot of knowledge of past lives and soul agreements and why they're in body today. But I find this is the case with a lot of my clients. A lot of my clients are people who have struggled knowing they're different, wondering why they're so sensitive to energy, wondering why they have digestive issues, wondering why they don't want to spend their time the way a lot of humans spend their time. And so, I basically don't, I would say, ever work with very young souls. Not because I'm not interested in working with young souls, but young souls don't seek out regression. They're not at that point yet of being interested in that. So I tend to work with people, certainly beyond mid-range of soul development, who just realize in many ways their perspective of life is different than a lot of other people. And so by understanding why they are seemingly different, it helps them move forward and make choices that suit who they are and why they're on the planet. Yeah.
What has been your greatest insight around what the soul is searching for lifetime after lifetime?
Yeah, I mean, I think the soul is searching for what I might call authenticity, meaning, following intuition, following head and heart, not just head and not just heart. Although I often say to people, it isn't head is the master and heart is the servant. It's heart is the master and head is the servant. So authenticity, appropriate treatment of one another, and trusting your intuition and letting it be your primary, source of guidance.
What is authenticity from a soul perspective rather than like a human personality perspective?
Yeah, I mean, when I use the word authenticity, it's being authentic to who you are at the core, not authentic just to your human. Well, let me back up a step. When we come into body, we merge our soul energy with a human body that has a personality that relates to the gray matter in our skull, that we do have a personality that is not our soul. And so it's being authentic to who you are as a soul, not just authentic to your human personality.
Mm. Would you say that the human personality is the one fabricated just to operate while we're here in this human lifetime, but as we go on, the soul personality always remains the same?
Yes, that we have I talk about this too in terms of archetypal nature. Our soul person, we call it archetype, call it personality. Our soul has both an orientation to how we operate, but our soul is the compilation of all the higher self and past life experiences we've had. So our personality changes lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. But our personality, before we come into body, our personality is agreed to with purpose. And sometimes they are personality issues we agree to have in this human personality that are going to push us harder to balance our karma and live our soul intentions in this current lifetime. Yeah. It's complicated.
Yeah, it goes deep. It goes deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the last ones I'll ask is, lifetime after lifetime, so much falls away when we leave this body behind. But I'm really curious to know, what do you feel remains when it's time to go through that death and rebirth?
And are you saying what remains when the soul leaves the non-functioning human body? What remains? Is that kind of what you're asking? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. What remains is who we are as a soul. That of course has been impacted by what our human personality was, but our human personality falls away. We do have the ability, because this shows up a lot with capable mediums who do readings for people. So once a life is over and the slice of our soul that resided within our body returns back and sort of reintegrates into the higher self, when we are either communicating with, so we're at the soul level, we no longer have a body, we're no longer incarnate. If we choose to communicate with a loved one, or if a medium is going to bring that transmission through, we do have the ability to show up with some of the characteristics of who we were in body so that our loved one recognizes us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Linda, we end every show with a segment called the Final Trio, which are just some quick questions that we ask at the very end. Before that, where would you send people to connect with you and your work and everything that you have going on, helping humanity remember who they are?
Yeah, people can go to my website. So my website is ravenheartcenter.com. So raven like the bird, heart like the heart in your chest, center, the American spelling versus the British spelling, ravenheartcenter.com. And there people can find my books, my regressions, training programs. I'm going to teach a short course in the fall for anyone that's all about soul. And it really ties to the new book called Soul Design. So ravenheartcenter.com.
Beautiful. We'll include everything in the show notes, in the description, where people can go directly and find you. For the final trio, the first two are personalized to each guest, and the last one we ask at the very end. So the first one is, what would you say to someone who doubts that their life has a divine purpose?
I would say pay attention to what you're passionate about. Pay attention. Another way I would put that would be, what juices you? What makes you happy? What are those passions? And not like, oh, I love to go lay on a beach and drink Mai Tais, not that. But what do you love to do? You love to be around young children. You love art. You love creating technological applications. And we don't have just a passion. We have more than one passion. So those passions come from your divine intentions at the soul level. Yeah.
If your guides, or now that you revealed Lord Maitreya, were speaking through you in this very moment, what would they want someone to hear right now?
Yeah. It's almost like, okay, tap into Lord Maitreya. A number of things. You have purpose. Yeah, I guess two key pieces just come to my mind. You have purpose, and you are always guided. So trust that.
And finally, we end every episode with a question that we call the time capsule question. It requires us to travel out a little bit into the future in a moment in time when young generations of today are going to be stepping more into leadership positions around the world and really carrying the baton of the people that came before us. And you had the opportunity to leave behind something inside of a time capsule for them. Imagine this as your legacy, what you would leave behind to the future generations. It could be anything that you can conceive of. It doesn't have to be anything physical per se. It could be non-physical, a symbol, a teaching, a poem, whatever you could think of. But knowing that this would be something that you would want to leave behind for the future generations to come, what would you leave inside of the time capsule?
Wow. Well, I'll just preface it by saying we have a 17-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 20-year-old grandchild. We have 3 grandchildren, and those are their ages. So it's easy to start thinking about people of that age and that generation because I spend a certain amount of time with our lovely grandchildren. Yeah, what comes to me is I would leave a note in that time capsule, and the note would say, not just to my grandchildren, but all of the generations to come. Trying to think of the words I want to put to it. Be sure to know the activities, the ways in which you find pleasure in life, and take time for those pleasures in life.
I think that's another reason why so many of us come to Earth, and that is because there are so many pleasures to be experienced, not just the other, end of the spectrum, like the negative emotions and things like that. great message to end off with. And I just wanted to finish off saying, Dr. Linda, thank you so much for the work that you do. You are a true pioneer, carrying this message forward of the soul and who we truly are, allowing us to remember that and explaining it in such a beautiful, researched way. So it's such an honor, such a pleasure. I would love to do this again. So the invitation is always open. And yeah, looking forward to the next time we get to co-create together.
Beautiful. I mean, it's been my honor, my pleasure to be able to share, what I've learned over time. And I would be more than happy to come back and do this again. So thank you, Emilio. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Awesome.